Well, it's Women's Month, and of course, we continue with our profiles. And this week, we are profiling multi-award-winning investigative journalist and author of numerous books, Mandy Wiener. Now, her books include Killing Kebble and Underworld Exposed, which was followed by Ministry of Crime and Underworld Explored. And the books also examine how organized crime, gangsters, and powerful political figures have been able to capture law enforcement authorities and agencies. My second initiation is a memoir of former National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Vusi Pikoli, who pursued criminal charges against the former President Jacob Zuma and also convicted former National Police Commissioner, the late Jackie Selebi. Mandy also co-authored Behind the Door with Barry Bateman on the fatal shootings of Reeva Steenkamp by Oscar Pistorius, and her latest offering, The Whistleblowers, details stories of several whistleblowers and their plight in South Africa. Author and investigative journalist Mandy Wiener joins us now just to take a look and reminisce about her career, and maybe we'll learn a little bit more about Mandy. Good morning, Mandy.
Morning, Sakina. Great to be with you today. Thank you so much.
So many people know you as this top investigative journalist in the country, cracking the whip on stories of corruption, and of all of this in pursuit of justice for whistleblowers. But I remember you, Mandy, from those Saturdays at a certain radio station where you and I started out working together.
So my first passion, I think, probably was sport, and I used to do the sports show. But that's it. You know, you have to start at the beginning if you want to get into this industry. You know what it's like. And the very first job that I had, one of the first, was producing a sports show. I also wrote traffic bulletins. I also call screened overnight. I'd go in to the studios at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and answer calls for the shows. And that's how you get a foot in the industry. So that's where I remember you from. We've known each other a very long time, Sakina.
And this is true. And, you know, it's called paying your dues. And we always talk about how things have changed over the years, Mandy. People don't seem to pay dues anymore. But, you know, just looking at how it started there at, you know, the sports desk, traffic, and where you finally ended up. How do you think, you know, that break came about for you to find yourself in this investigative space where you have crafted a very great niche for yourself?
Well, I always knew that I wanted to be a news journalist. I think it's something that is inherent. I think it's something either you want to do or you don't. And I was desperate to get into that news world. I listened to radio bulletins, I watched TV news, I read a lot, and I was begging my editor for a job. And the very first story I got sent out on was about water cuts in Houghton. And I was around the corner from Madiba's house in Houghton. Like, what could possibly go wrong? And I landed up being held up at gunpoint, and for some reason, instinct kicked in, and I recorded the whole thing. And the guy who was trying to hijack me apologized and gave me my possessions back. And I landed up on the front page of the Star, and I was on John Robbie's show the next day, and I got a job as a reporter. And I think I always sought out the stories that were about criminal intrigue and about the underworld. I landed up covering touche. I landed up covering the Kebble murder. And because of that, the Jackie Selebi trial, and I wrote Killing Kebble. And I think that's how I developed that niche of being a reporter that covered the criminal underworld.
And of course, you know, when we talk about the criminal underworld, and usually we're talking about shady, dark figures who are in the main men. And, you know, getting into that particular space, Mandy, how difficult is it to traverse that particular path and also to get to the sort of information that you've managed to uncover in your books?
So I think a lot of it is about building relationships and cultivating sources and being trustworthy and making sure that you're fair. I think that often journalists fall into the trap of maybe pushing one agenda more than another. And I was always extremely careful about making sure that I was as fair, as balanced as possible. You know, of course, journalists always have inherent bias. And I just tried to make sure that I was being as honest as possible. And it is about building those relationships. And I was able to do that, and I developed a reputation by doing that. But the kind of investigative journalism I do is very different to what some of my colleagues do, who follow the money, who are able to really delve into the intricacies of that kind of work. I'm terrible at that. I am not good at that at all. So for me, it's more about personal relationships, really.
And then it does come through, and I suppose having to do what you do, those are key, because how else do you then get to the sort of information that you need? But working in this intense and often frustrating space, Mandy, of investigative journalism, what are some of the things that make you lose sleep at night about our country?
So I'm incredibly optimistic about South Africa, which people don't understand, because if anybody can tell you how bad things are, that's literally my job every single day, is to call out the failures of government, to speak about the faults. And we do have a negativity bias as the media. And despite this, I still am incredibly positive. And I think that what we also sometimes do as the media, and you can disagree with me here, Sakina, is that I think we sometimes focus on a single story of South Africa. I love the quote from Chimamanda Adichie, who speaks about how the danger of a single story is not just that it's not true, but that it becomes the only story. And there are so many stories to tell about South Africa. So that's why I wrote about whistleblowers. That's why I like to speak about civil society and being an active citizen as well. So while in the past I wrote a lot about bad guys and negative things and about capture and about corruption and the criminal underworld, I am also trying to balance that by focusing on some of the more positive, optimistic stories as well.
Positive, optimistic stories, but sometimes with sad endings. You know, you talk about whistleblowers, Mandy, and just a couple of days ago, in fact, you wrote about the outrage following Babita Deokaran's death. And as you said, this is an important story, you know, and looking at how it has unfolded. Let's talk to that and your sentiments, more broadly speaking, about Babita Deokaran and what's happened there.
So I'm incredibly passionate about this. I feel very strongly about encouraging whistleblowers to come forward, about protecting whistleblowers, about advocacy around this. We need an urgent revolution in how we treat whistleblowers and legislation in South Africa. When I wrote The Whistleblowers 2 years ago, it was kind of prescient because I didn't realize that it would top the agenda as much as it did, although the contribution of whistleblowers to the State Capture Commission was invaluable. You had patriots coming forward, risking their lives and their livelihoods to testify at the Zondo Commission about this capture. And these are people who had proximity to wrongdoing. They were able to tell us about the brown leather bags filled with cash and the meetings at Melrose Arch and the money flows and what actually happened. And that contribution is enormous. So we cannot have a situation in South Africa where whistleblowers are killed. They land up being pushed to the fringes of society. Many of them are unemployed, unemployable. They land up sending out hundreds and hundreds of CVs and don't get employed because they're seen as problematic, as impimpies, as troublemakers. And that needs to change. They should be treated as national heroes. They should be given national orders. They should be appointed as ethics officers to the boards of companies. And if we're going to stop corruption in South Africa, we have to encourage whistleblowers to come forward, reward them, and protect them.
And you make that point over and over again, Mandy, but if we look at the objective reality, just take the Babita Deokaran case, because that is topical at the moment. And a year on since her passing, very little has been done. And even though you have evidence that has been there, seemingly in full glare for those who need to deal with it, not doing much with it, the CEO of that hospital still there, and there seems to be very little movement. So you also said that, you know, the outrage is hollow unless there is real, tangible change to the country's legislation and genuine accountability for those who looted the state, as well as for those who ordered the murder of Babita Deokaran, for example. But if you look at how things have unfolded in this particular case, does it give you confidence that the country's law enforcement agencies, including the Hawks and the NPA, are up to the task?
The Babita Deokaran story, for me, just highlights exactly what the problem is with the way that we treat whistleblowers in South Africa. Here you had a good civil servant. You had a woman who was able to find corruption. And we're talking here about tender fraud. And if you look at the News 24 investigations, they've told us about how the hospital was spending 500,000 Rand on skinny jeans for girls size 6 to 7, 500,000 Rand on wingback leather chairs. And that is very evidently problematic. So she tried to put the brakes on the payments. She knew that her life was in danger. She was gunned down outside her house after dropping her teenage daughter at school. A year later, nothing had happened. And it was only because of the work of investigative journalists that the provincial government was under pressure to appoint an independent forensic investigator, which is nowhere near enough. So the president has said the right things. Zondo has made recommendations. There's been an outcry. There is outrage about it. But none of that matters unless we see actual, tangible change. We need new legislation. There are options. We can look to what the US has done around the False Claims Act. We can look at what the Netherlands has done in terms of a whistleblower house. But there has to be a change. Government has to change the legislation. And we also have to just change the way in South Africa that we treat and protect and reward whistleblowers. Otherwise, we'll never win the war against corruption. And you asked me whether or not I think the law enforcement agencies are up to it. I think they are up to it. I think that we also have to remember that the NPA was a key site of state capture, that the organization was eviscerated, it was hollowed out, and that process takes time to rebuild. So we are seeing that rebuilding process happening at the NPA and at the Hawks and at various other law enforcement agencies. All of that takes time. I believe they are up to it. I think they need to be better capacitated. They need to be given more money and more resources, and they need the law as well. So it really is about changing the legislation too.
So, Mandy, we could talk about your work forever and a day, but just, with the few minutes we have left, just quick more, of an insight into who Mandy is, because you are, of course, this no-nonsense investigative journalist, but also took a peep at that top billing visit to your home where you revealed that, you love art and your book collection. But what does Mandy Wiener do when she wants to wind down from an intense work session?
So I am a mom as well. I've got 2 kids, and the reason I'm not in studio today, I'm sorry, is because I had to do the school run. So that obviously keeps me very, very busy, being a mom. And it's also changed the way that I look at my work. I'm less inclined to be running after criminals and putting myself at risk because of that. I love to read. I love to exercise. I play a lot of paddle. I go for walks in the wilds with my dogs, and I just try and find some balance. I think that balance is so important. I think that as a young journalist, I definitely didn't have balance at all. You know what it's like, you're running out to every news story and you want to make a name for yourself, and you're chasing every train crash and crime scene, and you always want to be there. And I think that as I've gotten a little bit older, I've appreciated the value of work-life balance, and that's why I always advocate for mental health with young journalists as well. It's an incredibly difficult job, and it's so important to make sure that we keep that in mind.
Mandy, it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you and, taking a moment to appreciate you and the work that you do during Women's Month. So please keep doing what you do, and, you make us all proud. Mandy Wiener, of course, is a multi-award winning investigative journalist and author, and we celebrate Women's Month, and we speak to various women who have made and continue to make an impact in South Africa.